Tonight, we're in Leeds. Welcome to Question Time. Big welcome to you at home, to our audience here who are going to be putting questions to this panel, who of course don't know what the questions are till they hear them. Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. The President of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron. UKIP's Communities spokesman, Suzanne Evans. The writer and chairman of the National Trust, Simon Jenkins. And in a change to our panel, the Conservative MP, Connor Burns. So the first question, please, which comes from Martin Mullen.
Should all British high schools have airport-style security installed following the tragic murder of Anne Maguire?
Yes, this dreadful event earlier this week. But let's deal with this question, whether there should be airport-style security installed in schools. Connor Burns.
Let me start by directly answering that question. No, I do not think there should be airport-style security in schools. This has been a tragic and appalling incident in this school, in this community. But we make our worst laws in this country when we legislate on the back of very emotional situations. The worst thing that politicians can ever say is, I'm going to legislate to ensure that insert subject X never happens again. And if you see some of the footage in American schools where it's like going into a war zone to get to the classroom, I don't want us to go down that route. Could I just say a word about this tragic event at Corpus Christi College and the brutal murder of Anne Maguire? The more one finds out about it, the more poignant it becomes. 40 years of service to that school, to different generations of pupils, children of former pupils coming to pay tribute to her. The fact that she was in school helping her students get the very best start in life on her day off. The fact that she was only a term away from retirement add to the poignancy of those events. I remember when my own headmaster, Brother Clement, retired in 1988, and I dug out his retirement speech, and he talked, I was educated by Brothers of the Sacred Heart in a Catholic school, and he talked about how I hurt with you when some tried periodically to bring the violence of society into the school community. But the worst thing that we could do is to destroy that school community by making it not a place of learning, but a place of fear. And can I just conclude by saying this very quickly?
All right.
We've all, I imagine, in this week, thought about teachers who've made a real difference to us. Anne Maguire's murder has touched a chord in the nation. And I hope that through her death, we will shine a light in the fact that in all the schools in this country, we are so blessed to have the dedication of so many teachers for whom teaching is not a job, but it is a vocation that they dedicate their lives to.
So Martin's question is, should high schools here have airport-style security after this murder? Simon Jenkins.
No, of course they shouldn't. And I don't disagree with anything that Connor said. I think all of us on the panel will share that feeling for the people of Leeds at this moment. All I would say in addition to what Connor said is the concept of fear as a driver of policy is really dangerous. I'm a Londoner. I see on the streets of London now policemen with guns all the time. They're there because someone somewhere has said, oh, there's a slight risk of a terrorist attack. All right, there's a slight risk of a terrorist attack. Almost everyone goes about life with slight risk attached to it. If you give in to that slight risk, if you give in to the policy of fear, you capitulate to it. You give in to it. And I just don't think that's what we should do. And I think the one thing you can take out of these tragedies is a reinforced determination not to give in to the politics of, to the policies of fear.
Okay. Suzanne Evans.
The question was, should we have airport-style security in schools? And I absolutely agree with Connor and Simon, no. Laws made in haste are bad laws. When I was 15 years old, I went to a school exchange trip to France, and I spent a week in a French school. And I was horrified when I arrived. There was a high security fence around and security guards inside. And this was such a contrast to the beautiful rural school that I was privileged to go to in Shropshire. And I thought, please, may our schools in Britain never be like this.
Okay. The woman in the back, third row from the back, yes.
Instead of maybe a police in school, maybe there should be a type of person, if any of the pupils have got any concerns or any thoughts like that, maybe somebody there as like a counsellor in a school instead of like an airport-style security type of measure, because that's just going to strike fear into pupils.
Some kind of different preventive measure. Yvette Cooper.
Yeah, I'm also in response to Martin's question. I think that it would be completely wrong to have airport-style security, not just in Corpus Christi, but in other schools as well. I think everybody has been struck by the huge outpouring of support, as well as the grief, not just for Anne Maguire and her family, but for the whole school. And it is a tribute to the head teacher, to the school itself, that they have worked so hard to support all of the pupils at such an awful time, with such a dreadful thing to happen. But I think as a result, we should listen to the head teacher, we should listen to the community and to what they've said, which is they want to keep the community a part of the school because it's the community that supported them through such a dreadful tragedy as well. We should hear their views and we should support them.
As a matter of fact, there are some schools that have metal detectors, aren't there, at the gates in Britain?
I think there's a big difference between schools where they've had problems, for example, with teenage gangs over a considerable period of time, and where the head teacher themselves says they think there are some safety issues that need to be addressed. And a situation like this where, you know, nobody is saying that that was the circumstance at Corpus Christi. In fact, circumstances were very, very different.
OK. I'll go to you and then to the woman up there. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I totally disagree with the fact that, we should bring in, airport-style, scanners and all that. I think that would, it's very intimidating. But I happen to work in the community, and I know Anne Maguire very well because I also work with the church. So what I think the government should be doing is, bringing in an intervention for these pupils. But nothing is being done to ensure that, the problems are resolved. The government is not doing anything. And there are so many cutbacks already, within the Department of Education, which is not, which has made a very negative impact on the schools and on the head teachers. Teachers have a problem time, with the children. Children don't listen anymore, so we all have to come in and intervene, and it's not working. It's really not working. And teachers also should be guaranteed safety in the school. I think policies should come into play in all these things.
What are your memories of her? You mentioned that you knew.
She was a fantastic woman. She was very God-fearing, and she liked instruments. She played instruments. She loved every pupil. She treated everybody as if they were her own children. She had a passion to ensure that every child succeeds in the school.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
I feel that teachers are under that much pressure with statistics, targets, and what's happening is because they're so pressured in trying to make their school look good based on what the government's making them do, they've not got the time to go back to the drawing board and look at the basic needs that children are wanting because they're too busy trying to get the stats up, like SATs. Couple of weeks' time, my daughter's doing a SATs. Everything's about in year 6 is SATs, 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 SATs. And teachers haven't got the time to be looking at the emotional well-being of children, and I think the government needs to address this.
I know that isn't the question, but you couldn't be more right. I think we need to value our teachers and allow them to teach and not spend half their time doing things that are about ticking boxes and conforming to league tables and so on. It's a huge distraction and has been a wrong direction for our education policy for some 20 or 30 years now. But to answer Martin's question, no, of course, there shouldn't be airport security or anything like it in our schools. It is hugely tempting when something as heartbreaking and bewildering as this takes place, as for somebody who's lives the kind of lives that we do in politics, to come up with a nice, simple, neat solution. And I haven't got one. I haven't got one. In the 24-hour media world that we live in these days, there's a desire to keep the story going, to find another way of talking about it, to keep it fresh. Let's just instead stand in solidarity with the family and with Corpus Christi and recognise this is an appalling tragedy. And I'll just say this, you know, for those of us who are not from Leeds and didn't know Corpus Christi College until this moment and didn't know what a wonderful school community it is, what a dreadful way to find out. But we have found out what an outstanding community it is, how fantastically people have stood with one another, what leadership the head has shown, and what tremendous love and affection those people at that school have shown. I am certain Anne Maguire will be proud of all of you.
Just before we leave this, Martin Mullin, who asked the question originally, what do you think?
I certainly feel that there should be some form of security or added security to schools, but I do think that the airport-style security is perhaps a bridge too far. Maybe somebody like a PCO officer or something, or like the lady said over there, somebody that the children can go to if they've had any concerns, not just to protect the children, but the teachers as well.
Okay, and you, sir, on the right there.
Yes, I doubt if the airport-style security will be effective. There's nothing wrong. It's quite easy to take a piece of plastic into the school or a piece of sharpened bone will have the same effect as a knife. So the airport-style security would be a waste of time.
Okay. Let's go on. Just a reminder that you can join this debate, of course, as any question on Question Time, via text or Twitter. And our hashtag, you probably know, BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981. Use the red button to see what others are saying. Let's take a question now from Carolyn Booth-Jones, please. Carolyn Booth-Jones.
In the light of recent news, is it fair to describe UKIP as a racist party?
Is it fair to describe UKIP, represented here by Suzanne Evans, as a racist party? Tim Farron.
I wouldn't say so. I think that clearly there are individuals within UKIP who have come to the fore with opinions that would make the BNP wince. And, of course, you've got Marine Le Pen from the French National Front who's reached out to UKIP. And I guess there'd be a sense where that would be a source of great embarrassment. But I think it's wrong to start playing the man rather than the ball. And
it was Labour that did this, wasn't it? It was Barbara Roach who said this.
I mean, my take is that in one sense UKIP's position, particularly on the issue of the European Union, is clear. And I kind of respect it, actually. That if you want to leave the European Union, I think it would risk several million jobs. I think it would risk our ability to tackle climate change. I think it would threaten a union that has helped to keep the peace in Europe for over half a century. I think it would help stop us catching criminals across borders. But if that's what you want, then you know who you should vote for. But if you believe that actually those things are a bad thing and it would be anti-patriotic to do those things, then I hope you'll support the Liberal Democrats instead.
But the questions about all these remarks that have been made and led to people being suspended from UKIP, like saying Lenny Henry should go back to a black country and all the rest of it. You know the quotes. Does that make you think it's a racist party or just a party that attracts?
Clearly, those individuals are guilty of racism, have made appalling quotes and have some appalling back history, including the guy who was on their particle broadcast just the other week. I think we've got to be very, very careful in not trying to just dismiss an entire political party.
All right.
I think it's just, I think first of all it is unfair. Having said that, UKIP have to account for some of the people who they put up on their behalf who have some of those objectionable views.
All right. Well, I'll come to you, Suzanne Evans, in just a moment. But first, Yvette Cooper, it was described as a racist campaign by Barbara Roche, who used to be Labour's immigration minister. Did you agree with her?
I don't think it's racist to talk about immigration. I don't think it's racist to say that you're worried about immigration. I don't think it's racist to say that you feel strongly about leaving Europe. I do think it is racist to say that Lenny Henry should leave the country because of the colour of his skin, as one of the Enfield candidates did. And there are other UKIP candidates who have also said things which I believe are racist. For example, the Oldham candidate who said that mosques should be pulled down. There's a Warsaw candidate who has said that Mo Farah cannot be British. And I think we should challenge that kind of racism wherever we hear it, and UKIP should do so too. And I think the right and responsible thing for UKIP to do is to expel all of those candidates, to take them off the ballot paper and not to be asking people to vote for them. If they do that, then we can have a sensible conversation about the serious and legitimate issues, whether it's around Europe, whether it's around immigration, important issues, but they shouldn't be marred by candidates who are pursuing very divisive views.
And just before I come to UKIP on this, what Barbara Roche said was they're deploying the same language and tactics used by openly racist parties like the BNP. Is that an accurate description?
Well, I've criticised the government for their go-home ads that they did last summer, which I think drew on the language of the national... Well, unfortunately, Tim, this is your government that is doing it. Well,
you didn't.
No.
You didn't. But the point is, the point is, when those vans were put up, the Labour opposition were totally silent. It took a Liberal Democrat to speak out against them.
Those ads were going round for months and months. You have Liberal Democrat ministers in the Home Office.
They went out for about 2 or 3 days and we stopped it.
No, that's not true, sadly. I wish it was the case, but it's sadly not.
And you didn't speak up against it.
Well, unfortunately, that's not true, Tim.
But
I think... trying to be outside the government when you are voting for every single thing that this government does just won't wash.
You know that you had the Labour spokespeople who were questioning about those racist vans said absolutely nothing because they were worried about it putting off some of their voters, I remember people saying. Well, and we stood up against it because it is absolutely outrageous that any government of any political colour should be trying to make a case.
All right,
it's also BNP
I now think we should bring UKIP back into this fight and leave the two of you for just a moment. Suzanne Evans.
Thank you. No, UKIP is not a racist party. I would certainly not be in it if it were, and neither does it attract racists in particular. We're currently running in the European elections at 38%. So that means a good sort of just over a third of this audience, if you're a typical audience of the British voter, you'll be voting for UKIP, and technically that means you could be called racist.
I'm tempted to test this, but I don't think I will.
And I know you're not, and you know that you're not racist either. The problem that we've had is that UKIP has risen phenomenally, and therefore, quite rightly, we are being put under a huge amount of scrutiny. And I have no problem with scrutiny. Every person that stands for election for UKIP or any other party, I'm sure my colleagues would agree with me, must be subject to scrutiny. We cannot expect to stand for public office unless we are fit for public office. But it's got to be a fair playing field. Now, I'd like to ask the audience a question. How many of you in this audience know that 7 councillors in the London Borough of Harrow, all of them black minority ethnic councillors, resigned from the Labour Party because they thought it was racist and discriminated against them? Hands up, how many of you know that?
Yeah, well,
right, practically none of you. Yeah. How many of you know...
You should maybe address it to Ms Cooper.
No, I'd just like to ask the audience now.
Well, you can't go on asking the audience questions. They want to hear from you, not the other way round.
Well, I think, OK, make the point. Nobody put their hand up. Nobody knows that. A serious issue. It didn't make the national headlines. It wasn't the lead story on the broadcast news. The fact is, and Barbara Roche, who we've talked about, has set up this campaign group. We know there are people going through our candidates' Twitter accounts. They're not doing it to the other party.
All right, Yvette Cooper, do you want to answer the charge?
Excess scrutiny.
Do you know about this?
I think there's always scrutiny of candidates, and there rightly should be. Our view in the Labour Party is wherever we have any suggestion of racism, it should always be challenged, and that is my point about what UKIP need to do. Is they just need to expel candidates who are expressing racist views.
We do, and we have expelled them.
Well, then,
all of them.
I think that's unfortunately not factually correct, but I hope you do. I hope you do very quickly, because then I think we can move on to a more serious debate actually about the issues, because that the danger is that this row is preventing us from discussing what I think are very genuine issues and concerns that people have. I think some of them have been hijacked by UKIP when there are important things, whether it is about immigration or the need for controls on immigration, or to tackle the concerns that people have about the way that cheap migrant labour is exploited to undercut wages and jobs. We need to deal with those sorts of issues. And if we don't, then it's easy for a party like UKIP to to kind of build up anger rather than provide answers, and it's answers that I think we need, and we need to have a debate in a possible way.
Built up anger by refusing to tackle these issues when you were in government
Anyway,
for 30
it was
years,
Labour who
encouraging
referred to UKIP as racist, which was where the
Well,
question came from.
no, actually, it was Barbara Roach and a cross-party campaign that Barbara has set up.
Are you
that was,
funding
that was
She
the
no
point.
longer Labour.
Well, of course she's a Labour
course she
Party
is,
member,
yes.
but it was a cross-party campaign.
You, sir, over there
My
on the right,
point is that you
okay.
need to have a serious debate about the issues and
okay.
deal with individuals.
You, sir.
My concern is that we've been talking about vetting candidates. However, obviously, there have been several in just recent history UKIP candidates, and my question would be, how can we be sure that you're actually vetting your candidates? Because if these aren't just views expressed in meetings that people have then reported on. These are on public. This is on social media, and how. My question is, how did that get away with that?
How did they get away with it in the first place?
Yeah.
Simon Jenkins, you want to come in on this?
The idea of vetting political candidates for being fruitcakes fascinates me. You wouldn't have many candidates left, some of the ones I know. I don't think it's a crime to be a fruitcake, and I sympathise with Suzanne. I mean, they are under extraordinary scrutiny at the moment. Then all fringe parties tend to be. The thing that I worry is this word racist. It's a bit like there's some law which says that when you're beginning to lose an argument, you start mentioning Hitler. When you're beginning to lose an argument, you start mentioning racism. It's a very dangerous way of trying to resolve a reasonable political debate. And the reasonable political debate, to my mind, is about the nature of British borders, the nature of immigrants into this country, how far we can handle particular numbers of immigrants, what is the nature of citizenship in Britain. These are real questions which are not related to race. And I don't think it helps the debate about them, which many people have been concerned about for a long time now, largely ignored by the major political parties, to say those people who do raise them are racist. That's wrong.
Okay. And the woman there on the left, in black and white, yes.
I'd just like to read you a bit from the UKIP leaflet that came through my door. So,
right.
thanks
Speed
for
up.
Suzanne.
Let's have it.
Okay. These are anxious and troubled times. As crisis has followed crisis, our politicians are doing nothing in the face of dangers rearing up all around us. Violent crime erupts in our cities. It goes on. It's just the politics of fear. Absolutely everything we hear that comes from you.
To answer Carolyn's question directly, I don't think UKIP is necessarily a racist party, although I think they have some racist people in them, and I think gradually as they emerge, they're dealing with them. That is clear. You know, the guy who talked about Lenny Henry going back to a black country, I was reminded during the week of Lenny Henry's comments after Enoch Powell's speech, where he said that Enoch Powell was offering him £1,000 to go home, which he said was incredibly generous because a ticket to Birmingham only cost a tenner. My worry about UKIP is not so much that they're a racist party, but they're an ineffective party. And we've seen what's happened when we've elected members of the European Parliament, those who haven't gone to prison for fiddling their expenses or left the UKIP whip, have not actually turned up and done the job. And I'll give you one really quick example. David Cameron negotiated in the Council of Ministers of the EU summit a cut of some €34 billion to the European budget, the first time in history the European budget's been cut. Nigel Farage and 7 other UKIP MEPs failed to turn up to support the resolution that implemented that cut. I think that they are a vent for protesters. The lady has just said they are whipping up anger. They are speaking to some of the worst fears and frustrations of austerity and concern about immigration. And I think the sooner that they actually spark the mainstream parties, as Yvette says rightly, to engage in these arguments seriously, the better, and the sooner they will then recede to where they came from.
And of course, there are Conservative councillors who've made offensive comments and been.
Of course, we all have people in our parties who emerge and we get rid of them.
UKIP is the only party that will not allow former members of the BNP to join. We found one that had lied last week and we kicked him out straight away. The Conservatives have a former BNP member standing as a council candidate. The Lib Dems in Sutton have a councillor who's been convicted of racially aggravated assault. You know, I'm afraid we don't have the monopoly on stupidity here. We're fielding 2,200...
You're just ahead of the field.
No? Let me come back to that.
All right. The man up there, sir, with the beard on. I mean, beard, not on. Not suggesting you came in disguise, yes.
We're talking about racism as if it should be a big issue in today's world. we're all human beings, so we're all equal in society. Different cultures and different nations is what's made Great Britain today what it has been over centuries. We're a United Kingdom, regardless of anyone's colour, regardless of what their beliefs are. If we work together, we're human beings at the end of the day in a peaceful society.
Okay, and
Fenella saying that UKIP is not classed as a racist party, then that's fine, but do you not tend to agree that the way that you go about your campaign provokes the general public to be racist? I recently heard that when Nigel Farage was visiting Wales, the visit had to be stopped because of UKIP supporters and fellow people arguing over racism.
No. Can I just answer that? Because, no, I mean, Nigel Farage is possibly being stopped from speaking at public meetings at the moment because of anti-fascist groups, which frankly are among the most fascist people I've ever encountered. There is a hard wing in this party of anti-UKIP feeling people who want to completely shut down the debate. You know, they will not allow free speech. These people do have no interest in democracy, and that is something that UKIP stands for fundamentally.
All right.
And just a couple of quick figures. We're fielding 2,235 candidates in the local elections on the 22nd of May, more than we've ever fielded before. The amount of people that have been caught out doing something wrong so far, it's about 0.3%. Now, let's just put that into context. In 2011, 0.61% of members of Parliament were in prison. You know, we are doing a lot better than MPs in the House of Commons.
This lesson in statistics, I think we just make a point from you in the middle there.
The time it took UKIP to respond and condemn the Lenny Henry tweet says it all. They are bigots and they use scare tactics to try and get votes.
Okay, and there's one hand up there I'll take from you as well, and then we'll move on. Yes.
So, if UKIP are coming across as a racist party due to a few members saying some racist comments, does it mean that Labour are all fraudsters after the Dennis McShane scandal?
I mean, we're what, 4 months off an incredibly important vote on whether the United Kingdom stays together. And amongst my concerns about UKIP is that they're focusing on the politics of fear and of division makes it all the more likely that this country will fragment. My view is we are better together, full stop.
Yeah. The mistake UKIP made was to go for immigration. It really was. It was about Europe. The election's about Europe. UKIP's about Europe. It's not about immigration. And I think it was a cynical decision of Nigel Farage's not to major on Europe, but to go on to immigration, because immigration is, in a sense, the politics of fear. And that's the last thing you want in politics.
But, Simon, immigration is what 70% of the people in this country tell us they're concerned about, and what 60% of black minority ethnic community people say they're worried about. Come on, we're politicians. We cannot ignore 70%.
Right.
The major...
I think we should be talking about immigration. Actually, Simon, I think we should be talking about immigration.
We should talk about everything, but I mean, this election's about Europe.
Yeah.
But it's also right to talk about immigration because it is something that people are concerned about. And we said that we in the Labour Party got things wrong in government on immigration.
Are you saying immigration is not a European issue?
To talk about
it's a subset, but
a subset, but I mean, it seems central.
We're electing members of the European Parliament. And I mean, I'm rather keen on elections being about what the election's about. And in this case, it's about electing a member of a European Parliament.
If it was about electing members of the European Parliament, do you think all the parties would take it quite as seriously as they seem to be?
Well, I mean,
it is about other issues
I come back to the question about the politics of fear. People are afraid of things. It's right. I mean, one of the reasons why I admire UKIP, in this sense, is that they have had the guts to stand up and say, you've suppressed this debate for a quarter of a century, we've raised the questions, we're now going to give you a party you can vote for. I respect that, that's fine. But I just think this particular election, I mean, I care about Europe one way or another, and I'm sorry if actually the election is no longer about Europe. It is about immigration and the tendency to couch that in racist terms.
All right, let's move on to another question. Thank you very much. Peter, thanks everyone. Peter Pickard, please. Peter Pickard, let's get into this other topic. Mr. Pickard.
Will Ed Miliband's proposals on rent help or hinder the rental market?
These are the proposals made today by Ed Miliband, in effect to control rents, to make rental agreements last for 3 years, to cap the increase in rents and all the rest of it, his aim being to cut the cost of living for people, and large numbers of people, 9 million I think it is, living in rental accommodation. Has he stolen a march, Tim Farron, with this on the coalition's policy?
I don't think so. I mean,
Is it a good idea?
I think some of what he said today is a good idea, and some of it really isn't. I think he's shown that he has identified the problem, Peter, but not understood it. Because the reason why private rents are high is because of a lack of supply. It's blindingly obvious. And amongst the things that, you know, the Labour Party should be embarrassed about from its 13 years in power is that they built fewer council houses than Margaret Thatcher. Now, that takes some doing. And that we're in that situation, that is why rents are as high as they are. And so the answer is supply, is to build more affordable homes. And essentially, how do you do that? It's by identifying garden cities, new, fresh places. It's also, though, about regenerating the north of England in a way which is going to be taking advantage of what is Britain's largest untapped resource, which is much of, you know, the north of this country, this part of the United Kingdom.
You in favour of a rent cap or not?
No, I'm not, because I think what will happen... I mean, in theory, it sounds a great idea. In practice, you will crush supply and you'll put people out of homes who would have been in homes otherwise. You reduce rent by increasing supply. And you do that, by the way, by allowing housing associations to be at the vanguard. Housing associations just want to be allowed to borrow against the value of their stock. And we need to build 300,000 houses a year. We will not do it by tinkering. Ed Miliband is wrong if he thinks the housing crisis is caused by too much regulation. It is caused by not enough building.
OK. So, it's the wrong problem that Ed Miliband's going for.
I don't think it is.
He should be building houses. What are they building at the moment?
We've got to do both. We've got to build houses, we need far more homes, and we also need to do something to help the 9 million people who are in rented accommodation now across the country. And it's, you know, Tim can sound indignant, but the reality is that under this government we've had the lowest level of house building. We've had the lowest... I didn't interrupt you. We've had the lowest level of house building since the 1920s. And that is the real consequence of what this government have been doing. So, yes, we need to build more homes, but we also need to help people who can't wait for homes to be built and are living in rented accommodation, often with children. I mean, if you go back a few decades, you know, families with children would think they'd be in maybe social housing, maybe in their own homes and having bought their own homes. For a lot of people now really struggling, if they don't have the bank of mum and dad to rely on to be able to buy their own home, to get on the mortgage ladder, they're in rented accommodation with their kids, never knowing whether suddenly the landlord might say, sorry, you've got to move out. Or, sorry, I'm going to put the rent right up. And they've got to move away from their children's school, move away from the neighbour who does the babysitting. That kind of insecurity is really damaging families. That's why I think you need these longer-term tenancies, these 3-year tenancies, and why you also need a ceiling on the rent increases that landlords can apply during that 3-year period.
All right. You say.
I think Yvette Cooper there is being disingenuous. You can't turn on the volume of house building on and off like a switch. It takes time. It was the Great Recession of Labour brought in that brought the collapse of house building, and brought the collapse in the number of houses that were being built, and that is starting to recover now.
And what do you think of this idea of stopping rent increases and making sure
absolutely with Tim Farron on this. The issue is the supply of housing. It's not about how much, and it seems to be a Labour policy that is the same about energy prices. Let's cap it. That's the solution. Yeah. They don't address the real underlying issue. The underlying issue with energy prices as well was actually whilst Ed Miliband was in power, he brought in all these green taxes that put up the cost of energy.
Okay. And the man behind,
turning it on it.
The man behind you, and then I'll come to you, Conor. The man behind you.
What we need to do is to actually build more houses, not come out with these gimmicks that Labour seems to do all the time.
First of all, we're talking about the rental culture as if somehow that's wrong. I understand that in places like France, it's perfectly normal to rent for most of a person's life. I also accept that there is a need for accommodation that's affordable. However, one of the things that we seem to be missing is that the builders, the developers, are wanting to do their new builds, and then these are not affordable houses. These are expensive houses, on land that was formerly green belt. That is going to be destroyed forever. There are places in many of the city centres now, old brownfield sites, that are ready to be redeveloped to make affordable homes for people who can live near where they work. That will not happen in the outer suburbs. All that will do is make the developers much, much more wealthy and will destroy our heritage, our children's and grandchildren's heritage forever.
There's a difference of opinion between Simon Jenkins for the National Trust, wearing his National Trust hat, and the Conservative Party, I know, on the planning of this. So, Conor Burns, you answer first, and then Simon, I'll let you come in.
Well, look, let's answer the question directly about this proposal by Ed Miliband. I often worry that what can appear to be very good politics for a party can be very bad policy for the country, and I fear that when a politician comes forward with a very simplistic answer to what is a very complicated problem, it's probably the wrong answer. Look, remember back to the Labour Party conference when Ed Miliband was in Brighton, and he appeared on the soapbox in the town centre, and he was asked by a gentleman, "Are you going to bring back socialism?" And Ed Miliband's reply to that was, "That is what I am doing, sir." And we're seeing a trend in some of these rather populist announcements. We saw it, as the gentleman referred to a moment ago, on the energy price freeze. No freeze before the freeze, no freeze guaranteed after the freeze. Pure populism. We saw it on the suggestion that he might nationalise land, take away land from private developers if they didn't feel that it was the right time.
And is this one a bad idea, this new one?
I think this one is a bad idea. This is a very complicated problem. We've got to catch up from the fact that the last Labour government of over 13 years built fewer houses than any government since the 1920s. And we are trying to do that. We have got over $19.5 billion of public and private money going into affordable housing. The number of first-time buyers is at a 5-year high. Housing construction's at its highest level since 2007. But the point the gentleman made a moment ago, you can't simply turn on the tap. The minister can't simply say, "I want you to develop 100,000 houses next year."
But you turned off the tap.
We're playing catch-up.
The reality is that the government turned off the tap when the economy was starting to grow.
I didn't interrupt you, as you just said.
Right.
With respect, the one tap that you
You're allowed
turned
to have
on...
an argument.
Well,
You don't have to be
absolutely.
absolute.
David's going to get very bored if none of us interrupt.
If I can relate this back to the previous question about UKIP and fears, when the Conservative Party left office in 1997, net immigration was 48,000 people into this country in that year. At the end of the Labour government, it was 233,000. If you're going to welcome that number of new people into your country, you've got to make sure you have the houses and the infrastructure and all the things that are available that people need when they come to live in the United Kingdom.
So your Planning Minister, Nick Bowles, is right to want to build more on greenfield sites to get the thing moving. That's the Tory policy on this.
Well, if Nick were here tonight, you could ask him.
Well, he ain't, so I'm asking you.
I'm not a planning expert by any means.
OK,
but look,
all right.
Very quickly, what I see is some of the stuff we're encouraging with localism and councils to take the lead on this stuff. I'm seeing, for example, in Bournemouth, town centre developments where we're mixing retail and residential, and we're getting our town centre people moving back in. That's the sort of thing I want to see.
OK, Simon Jenkins.
I mean, to answer the question, the idea that you increase the supply of rented accommodation by capping the rent is absurd. I mean, that is just illiterate economics. I just don't know what... I don't know what... I have to say, I am mildly in favour of some safeguards for tenants. I think that's reasonable. But the idea that you solve this problem by capping rents is Castroite, is absurd. But on the main thing, you will never...
Sorry, what do you mean by Castro-like?
Castro fixed all the rents in Havana, and no house has been restored for about 30 years. That's the way you want to... If you want to wreck the housing market, cap price. But coming back to this question about housing, you will never, ever build your way out of house price rises by simply allowing the fields to let rip. I mean, it is stupid. It destroys what we value about the countryside. It's not necessary. It's caving into a particular very powerful lobby at the moment, the house building lobby. And they all want the same thing. They want rural sites for 300 volume units of housing. And it's the most damaging thing to the British countryside we've seen since the last war. It mustn't happen. But the resource, the real resource for housing in this country is in cities, in underused property. There is a vast store of empty rooms. We have more empty rooms in Britain, apparently, than any other country in Europe. We are so hysterical about house building. because the lobby wants us to do that. Every week you'll see a story in the newspapers about a chronic shortage of house building. It's house restoration we should be concentrating on. That's the green thing to do. Use existing city sites, which are empty, brownfield, where people now live, people want to work, people want to move out of an under-occupied property into one that fits their needs. Making the urban housing market fluid is the way to solve the housing crisis, not plonking housing in
And try and find some younger people in the audience who may be stuck in rented accommodation or may choose to live in rented accommodation. You put your hands down immediately. OK, I'll go to you, yes.
I think the problem here has got nothing to do with the supply. It's the type of housing. In Leeds, we've got around just about around 27,000 people on the council waiting list. Yeah, we need more council houses. Both the Conservatives and Lib Dems and Tories, they've all been selling off the housing. You know, some of the right to buy schemes. Now, what we need is a mass building programme of council housing. We need to take public sector housing back under public control. That's how we can control the rents.
OK. The woman there, yes.
I just want to make a point to the Conservative MP. When you try and pass the blame for current things to the Labour Party about immigration, it just makes me want to turn off. But to the gentleman that asked about the actual housing thing, surely Ed Miliband should be concentrating more on helping people to actually get a mortgage and actually buy a house rather than focusing on the rental market.
All right, and you in the front here.
Hi. I think that everyone keeps mentioning about turning off the tap, turning on the tap for building houses. It can't be done. That's exactly why we need more security measures for people who are in rented accommodation at the moment.
Suzanne Evans, what do you make of it?
Well, I don't want my countryside to be concreted over. At the moment, we need to build one house every 7 minutes in order to keep up with supply. And like it or not, migration is a factor in that. I mean, net migration is still at 212,000 a year, despite the fact that David Cameron promised to get it down to tens of thousands. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that and fulfil his manifesto promise by 2015 unless he completely shuts the borders down for everyone outside the EU. And I certainly don't want to see that happen. It is true that homelessness is now caused, in the main, by the ending of private tenancies. There is a problem here, and local authorities are really struggling. But this reactionary policy brought in by Ed Miliband today, which has already been described by experts as possibly one of the most stupidest policies ever invented, it really is not the answer.
All right. Just before we leave this, Yvette Cooper, you must answer A, this one of the stupidest policies ever invented, and Simon Jenkins saying it was Castro-like, it would just bring housing to disrepair if it was put through. It just would mean nothing was built and nothing was repaired and the place would become like Cuba.
I think the problem is that nobody on the panel is suggesting answers for people who are in rented accommodation, who find themselves in really insecure tenancies and find that their landlord can suddenly increase their rent way above the local market, way above the inflation. The normal tenancy, since Margaret Thatcher introduced it in the 80s, the only tenancy that most people can get is a 6-month tenancy. After that, you could be asked to move by your landlord with very short notice. What we're saying is the normal tenancy that people should get is a 3-year tenancy to give people some security. The rents would still be negotiated just as it is normal. The government wouldn't set the rent, the council wouldn't set the rent, it would be the normal market negotiation about what the rent would be. But in those 3 years, you would have some limits on the increases in the rents that the landlord could introduce so that you couldn't just suddenly find yourself being exploited or unable to stay in the area where your kids are going to school. I think that is a sensible intervention in the housing market because it's a way of helping people with the cost of living crisis that is really squeezing people. And it's all very well for everybody to say it's Castro-like and so on, but if they're not going to provide answers, I think they are letting people
Simon Jenkins,
down.
you're not providing answers. Quick answer, Simon.
The answer is free up the urban housing market. Make it tax deductible to let out your spare room. It's spare rooms that are the problem. It's not housing in the countryside.
Right.
Building is not the
Government's
answer.
taxing
It's spare rooms. There's millions of spare rooms, but they ought to be liberated into the market, and then rents will come down.
I'll take one more point from the man in the second row from the back. There, you say, yes.
It is comments like this that get young people so disinterested in politics. It's frankly just an anomaly to say that this is going to help people in any kind of way at all. Surely it's just the nail in the coffin that is the cost of living crisis, this piece of spin that Labour has drawn out, which is frankly failed.
Why? OK. Why are you so sceptical about it? Why do you think it won't work?
Because the economy is on the up. Everything that they've been saying over the last 3 years with regard to the economy has proved untrue. People are getting wealthier, and it is spin like the cost of living crisis, which is spiralling out of control, and Ed Miliband is just trying to reclaim.
OK.
Well, I think a lot of people aren't feeling it.
Well, we'll come to the economy in a moment, maybe. All right, we'll come to the economy. Thank you very much. Just before we... This is a funny question. Ron Fallows. We'll just spend a minute on this, and then we'll move on to another question. Ron Fallows, quickly, if you would.
Are the panel breathing a sigh of relief at the news that Jeremy Paxman is to leave Newsnight?
Are the panel breathing... The politicians on the panel, I assume. I have no dog in this fight, myself. And I don't think Simon Jenkins does. Very briefly.
I am gutted. I've been on Newsnight a couple of times. I've never been interviewed by Paxman. I better hurry up.
You've got a couple of months to go.
I feel like I've missed out, yeah.
Yvette?
Jeremy Paxman's strength, I think, is always actually in the expression on his face when people are answering the questions, as much as it is the questions themselves. So, yeah, I think everybody will miss Jeremy Paxman. I think he's an institution.
Conor Burns.
I must be honest, I've been too busy in the last 24 hours worrying about appearing alongside a legendary Dimbleby to give any thought to Jeremy Paxman.
Good answer.
Good, very flattering and quite right. Suzanne
David,
Evans.
there's a vacancy. Come on.
Yeah. What, on Newsnight?
Yes.
No, but it means staying up all night, like you said.
You should make way for an older man.
Suzanne Evans.
I'm very disappointed Paxman is going. Who can forget that time when he was questioning Michael Howard and he asked him the same question 12 times and Michael Howard still didn't answer? Fantastic. Yeah. We need people like that to give us politicians.
And it actually, I watched that because it was on today, and it wasn't the same question. It was cleverer than that. It was the same question put slightly differently a lot of the time. It wasn't just sitting there muttering the same old thing. It was a very, very good interview. And he did have in the middle of it, he said, I don't want to be rude, but I have to ask this again. You know.
He was absolutely
I'm not trying
brilliant.
to be funny or anything, you know. It was one of those.
And I have been on Newsnight.
Less polite now.
I have been on Newsnight, and it was great to be there. And afterwards, I was able to tweet the immortal line, I survived Paxman.
OK, now let's go back to what you touched on about the state of the economy in general, and take a question, this important stuff. Libby Tinworth, please.
Do the panel think steps should be taken to protect workers on zero-hour and temporary contracts?
Does the panel think... Can you just say it again?
Sorry, do the panel think steps should be taken to protect workers on zero-hour and temporary
contracts? To protect workers on 0 hours and temporary contracts, which is, as we know, there are a lot of it about at the moment. What's your view, Libby?
I just think the government should put something in place to support businesses so that the workforce can have peace of mind. I mean, things like rent and things, you don't know where you're going to be from week to week if you can afford to live. So it's just about peace of mind for the workforce and make people want to get out there, enjoy working.
And so what would you do? Abolish the 0 hours contract?
Yeah, I think it definitely needs looking at, and it's just very hard to live, you know, not knowing where you're going to be and how much money you're going to bring into the family home. So yeah, it is something definitely needs to be minimised, you know, taken back. So.
Conor, how long have you been on a temporary contract yourself, on a 0 hours contract?
Since August last year.
Right. Conor Burns.
Look, I think probably anybody on the panel who is a Member of Parliament will tell you that possibly the most distressing case that comes to you is someone who wants to work and can't find the dignity of work. I've had a number of those since I was elected in 2010. And let's be clear that for some people, particularly those who've been unemployed for some time, a 0 hours contract is better than no contract at all and can be a route back in to full-time employment. Students, I have 17,000 students in my Bournemouth constituency. A lot of them welcome the flexibility that gives them to do part-time work. The question was, should the government do something about it? The answer is that this government is doing something about it. This government launched a consultation, the Department for Business. They've had over 30,000 responses. We've been talking to people on zero-hours contracts. We've been talking to businesses. We've been talking to trade unions. That consultation closed on the 14th of March, and the government will come forward with a response soon. Now, that is something. We are, unlike the previous government, actually looking at it. We recognise there is a problem. So we need to tackle those for whom zero-hours contracts are not the right thing and give them more protection.
Can you just define what the problem is? 'Cause I don't understand how you can have a contract if it doesn't say anything about how long you have to work. Well, how can you be under contract to somebody?
In a sense,
if they're not under an obligation to offer you work.
It's like the old thing you used to have in ports and so on, where people would turn up in the morning to see whether there was any work available that day. And for a lot of people, that's an absolutely unsustainable way to organise their lives, and particularly when we're encouraging people...
It's not unsustainable, Connor. It's completely immoral.
Absolutely. And it is, when we're encouraging people to come off benefits and get into work, we need to put the incentives in place to do that. And when they cannot guarantee their income under these contracts, for those for whom these are not suitable, as I say, there are people, students and others, for whom they are suitable. But the government is doing something. The previous government didn't do. They grew enormously under the last Labour government. Let's wait and see what the consultation says.
But what is the suppliers' side, the workers' side of this contract? What are they saying they'll do? Be available any time?
Be available.
When ordered to come up, they'll come?
Be available.
And otherwise they won't get any work at all? Yeah. That's the deal, isn't it?
And they won't get their travel expenses paid if they've travelled somewhere. They might be waiting hours between shifts. It's completely unacceptable to treat people like this. Yes, there might be the few tiny minority for whom it works, but I think Libby summed up the situation very well, and it really does have to change. But one thing that's been forgotten in this whole debate is that we can directly chart the massive increase in the use of zero-hours contract from the time that the EU agency workers regulations were introduced into this country. And that meant that temporary employees after 12 weeks had to be on exactly the same terms and conditions as a full-time employees. Now, of course, big businesses didn't like this, and zero-hours contracts was their way of getting around that particular piece of EU legislation. And that's why they have rocketed. I'm afraid, once again, we have the EU to blame for this one.
Simon Jenkins.
I think the most important thing to remember is this is now huge. I think half of all employees in the catering, tourism and entertainment business are on zero-hour contracts.
Yeah.
I mean, something like 10% of all workers are on zero-hour contracts. It is not a small matter. And as with the capping rent control, you legislate into the free market at your peril. I believe that there are ways in which you can ease the pain of zero-hour contracts. I mean, there have to be certain minimum standards expected of people. I think travel expenses, I mean, the National Trust have a lot of these. You can't run...
National Trust have a lot of zero-hour contracts. Do you?
Everybody does in this business. I mean, everybody does. You're talking as if... Where do you all work? People work in the service industries are on these sorts of contracts. The only question is, can you make them as fair and as painless as they possibly can be? Many of the people don't want to work full-time. Many of the people are happy to be called in when the sun shines, because you probably want 2 or 3 times your normal staffing when the sun shines, when it's raining. When a big tourist flow is coming through, you're staffing up your operation. You've got to be able to take it down when that ceases to be the case, because you're going to lose money. You've just got to be sensible about this. I do think it's fair for the government to regulate fairness and humanity in employment. That's fine. But the idea that you can get away from what is now a massive source of employment for particularly young people is ridiculous and counterproductive.
The woman here. Respectful, yes.
I don't think it's the zero-hour contracts that are the problem, because they provide huge flexibility to the economy. It's the employers who are exploiting these zero-hour contracts and making the workers' lifestyle about this.
Yeah, I mean, the worst part...
So you're not... Are you on one yourself?
I'm not on one, but I know people are on one, and I think...
You're on one?
You're waving. Before I got me into employment, yeah, certainly, yeah.
And what's your view of it?
Oh, they certainly should be kept, yeah, certainly. I mean, like I say, it was the sort of break into the industry, as you mentioned, sorry, yeah.
It's the way into a job.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
And then I got a contracted place from that. So, I mean, obviously, like as you mentioned, it might just be my own case. I'm not sure on the figures. I'm not into all that, but it certainly worked for me.
Yvette Cooper.
I think the big question is, why is it so often the only route into a job? Why is it that so many organisations, as Simon refers to, are now seeing zero-hours contracts as normal? They shouldn't be normal. Yes, there will be some areas, for example, where there is some seasonal fluctuations, or there may be areas where there are people who've retired who want to be able to work on very flexible contracts. But for them to have expanded so much, so substantially in such a short period of time, I think is a very serious problem about the way in which the labour market is working. And there's a series of problems. There's obviously a big problem for people who are told they have to be available. Telling somebody they have to be available but not guaranteeing them any work is completely wrong and completely exploitative. People can't plan holidays, they can't plan anything, and they never know, they can't even get things like the working tax credit because they don't know how much they're going to be earning in a particular week. But there's also a problem where people are kept on 0 hours contracts when in fact they're working regular hours, and they're working week after week after week after month on regular hours contracts, and not given the employment support that they should be in those regular hours. I think that is not fair on people too. That also ought to be addressed. And at the moment, there's no suggestion that the government seems to be addressing that issue about what happens to people who are on long-term regular hours.
How do you know until we publish our review? How do you know until we publish our review?
I want to bring in one or two people who haven't spoken yet. The woman there in the fourth row. And then I'll come to you up there. Yes, briefly, if you would.
I run a business that provides services for the care sector, and the care sector is almost exclusively 0 hour contracts. But I think sometimes it's very easy to hit employers over the head with a hammer about them. The reason in care that 0 hour contracts came about was because local authorities who contracted out their services for care refused to pay for block contracts. So now they say you can't employ a workforce, so you don't know how many people you need, you don't know when you need them, and local authorities pay for services by the minute.
Yes.
So it's and they won't pay for time. Local authorities will not pay employers to pay their staff for travel time. They won't make allowances for training. They won't pay anything other than contact time. So they have engineered the need for 0 hour contracts.
Should the law be
within the
changed so
sector.
they can't do this, in your view?
No, I don't think you can interfere with what employers do. So I agree with you there. But what they should is, it's all about funding, and particularly in essential services like care, it's about getting the funding right so that we can provide the proper services and jobs for people who provide those services.
Tim Farron.
Well, there's a whole different question there, really, because you are working in a profession that is dealing with and providing services for the most vulnerable people in this country, millions of us, and there will be millions more of us as the years go on, and yet it needs to be, we've seen with the abuses that have been spoken about, which of course a tiny minority of cases, we need our care sector to be as funded and as esteemed as much as people who work in the National Health Service, for example. But on the issue of 0 hours contract, look, you make the point, and Simon makes the point, why when the government legislates and regulates, and it should, we need to be very careful we don't throw babies out with bathwater. There are a whole range of things we need to get right. But let's be honest, there are lots of people on 0 hours contracts, not because it's convenient for them, but because it's convenient for the employer, and it exploits the employee. You do not have zero rent. You do not have zero bills. And so have 0 hours and not know whether you're going to have any income at all that week, when you might be able to be eligible for benefits one week and not the next, and all the heartache and confusion that builds in, that is something we must restrict.
Okay. Got to stop, I'm afraid. Our hour's up. Next week we're going to be in Southampton. Panel, Shirley Williams from the Liberal Democrats, Grant Shapps, Chairman of the Conservative Party, Chuka Umunna, Labour's Business Secretary, and guess who? Nigel Farage, leader of UKIP. And the week after that we're going to be in Coventry. Now come to Southampton or Coventry, apply the usual way. The website's address is there, the telephone number 0330 123 99 88. And if you're listening to this on 5 Live, this debate goes on 5 Live with question time, extra time. It doesn't go on here in Leeds because that ends this edition of the programme, with my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came to take part. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
Well, snooker championship action continues.